Hello everybody and welcome back to City Sewers. Today's video is going to be about making mozzarella cheese. This is a frozen ball of mozzarella cheese because I was not ready to use it right away. And this is a great way to store mozzarella cheese when you don't have a ready use for it, but you need to use that milk. So this is going to keep just fine even for a few months in the freezer. Mozzarella is a very simple and easy cheese to make. It takes about an hour of work. And it can be made with pretty much any type of milk. I have made it with both cow milk and goat milk, and it's totally been fine. I use the cow milk from the store. You just have to get whole milk. It can be pasteurized, and I use raw goat's milk. So both work. You still end up with some mozzarella cheese. It tastes the same. Your mozzarella with goat milk might be a little bit more white than cow mozzarella. With cow's milk, you might end up actually getting a little bit more cheese at the end than you do with a goat because the cheese curds are actually a smaller curd. They're a finer particle, so it just comes out to being a smaller mass of cheese. But it's still totally usable. In today's video, I was making a double batch of cheese because I had a lot of milk in the freezer. So generally speaking, 1 gallon of milk is going to give you 1 pound of cheese. So this is a little bit more because I was using twice the amount of milk. So I have all the instructions in this video are for 1 gallon of milk to make mozzarella cheese. Just during the pulling process, I ended up combining. I did 2 separate batches on the stove side by side. You'll see it in the video. Enjoy learning how to make mozzarella. Now, again, I'm going to be kind of doubling my batch here and making 2 gallons of mozzarella instead of 1. But what I'm going to have to do is, just because of the headspace in my pots, I'm actually just going to do 1 gallon in each pot. It's just going to make me feel a little easier about doing it. I might one day try doing 2 whole gallons in 1 pot, but it makes the pot so full it's hard to work with. So I'm just going to do 1 gallon per pot, and I can give you the directions that way. The list of things that you're going to need for mozzarella are, you're going to need your milk. We have raw goat's milk here. You're going to need citric acid, and you will need a form of rennet. You can use either animal rennet, or you can use vegetable rennet, or you can use a liquid rennet versus a tablet. It's all interchangeable. It'll all work out. You can use whatever source of rennet and whatever form of rennet, but it will work. You'll need a pot to warm your milk in. You'll need a thermometer to check your temperature. You're going to need salt because every cheese needs salt. And honestly, you might want to use a strainer, like a fine mesh strainer. It's going to be really helpful when it comes time to press the curds and when we're starting to stretch. And you're going to need another large bowl for stretching and doing all of that stuff. The first step is that we're going to need to acidify the milk. And we use citric acid for that. I bought it in bulk and I'm reusing a container of my own. But we're going to use citric acid to acidify our milk. But the way to do that is we're not going to pour the citric acid directly into the milk because we don't want it to be clumped up because it'll start curdling the milk if it is too concentrated. So what we want to do is we're going to dissolve the citric acid powder into a 1/4 cup of cold water that is non-chlorinated. So it needs to be cold filtered water. And then we're going to put that in the bottom of our pan. And when we pour our milk into the pot, that is when it will get mixed in. There's conflicting information out there on the internet as to how much citric acid you need per gallon of milk. And honestly, every source is going to have a different amount. There are some sources that say you need 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid per gallon of milk, and there are others that say you need 1 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. Now, what I have done and have succeeded with is 1 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid per gallon of milk. It seems to work. I don't have any issues with it. I'm not saying that you should not try the other amounts. Give it a whirl, see what works for you. But for me, today, we're going to be making it with 1 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid per gallon of milk. So I actually have 2 glass measuring cups here that each have a 1/4 cup of cold filtered water that is chlorine free. And so I'm gonna add my citric acid into the cold water and dissolve it before I put it into my pots, and then add my milk. All right, my citric acid is now fully dissolved. I'm gonna put it into my separate pots here, like so. I know, right? That's really complicated. All right, now we're gonna add our milk. So now that we have put our milk in our pots, the next step is that we're going to heat that milk over a medium-low heat until it is 88 degrees. And you're gonna wanna stir it really frequently because you don't want to risk any of that milk scalding to the bottom of your pan. So it's just a gentle stir and a gradual heating up to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'll have the Celsius conversion down at the bottom of the screen. So once that heats up to 88 degrees, we're gonna add in our rennet. Okay, while your milk is heating, what you need to do is put your rennet in cold water. It helps, especially with the tablets, because they take a little longer to dissolve. It helps to get that going ahead of time. Now, the measurements on either kind of rennet is that you're going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of a liquid rennet, and you're going to use, or you're going to use a 1/4 of a tablet. So what we're going to do now is, I have a liquid rennet. I'm going to put it into my water really quick. Okay, now that your milk is heated up to 88 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to add in our water mixed with rennet. But what we're going to do is we're going to stir the milk constantly while we're pouring it, and you keep stirring for about 10 seconds, no longer. 1, 2, 3. All right, now we leave it. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to leave it alone. We want to let it coagulate or curdle, or however you want to call it. Some people say 15 minutes, some say 30. I say it's not gonna hurt it to let it sit longer. So we're gonna wait for 30 minutes. So I'm gonna set a timer and completely leave it alone. Do not stir it while we're trying to get that curd set. So we'll meet back here in 30 minutes. All right, so our 30-minute timer just went up. I wanna show you guys these curds before I do anything to them. It's really cool. Now at first glance, it doesn't really look like anything has changed. It looks very similar to what happened when we first set our timer. But if we tilt it, it's a solid mass. And if you poke it just a little bit, it's soft and spongy. It's very cool. This is baby mozzarella. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut the curds using a knife. Now it doesn't need to be a chef knife, just any knife that will reach the bottom of your pot, honestly. And we're just gonna cut it into about 1-inch cubes. So it looks roughly like a grid now. Now that our curds have been cut, we're gonna actually drain them into a colander, and we wanna try and get as much of the way out as we can at this point. Meanwhile, with our pots that no longer have any curds in them, what we want to do is we're going to heat up a hot water bath. It is how I prefer to stretch my cheese. I've tried it in the microwave, and I feel like I prefer the hot water bath method. What I'm going to do at this point is actually combine my two batches as I'm draining them, because it's going to be easier than trying to juggle two separate batches. So I'm just going to be stretching the whole mass of curds all together. One thing that we can do at this point is actually to add our salt before we drain our curds. Salt is entirely up to your personal preferences. I'm still working out the kinks in how much salt we want in our cheeses. Cheese making is a constant learning experience. No two batches are going to be exactly the same, but you can try to get a consistency. However, we are still working out the kinks of exactly how much salt to add to our mozzarella and when to add it, honestly, because different recipes give you different methods. So today I'm trying a method where I'm going to add the salt before I drain the curd, so it will help penetrate the curd a little bit more. I won't have as much of an issue with the outside being perfectly salty, but the inside is really bland. So I'm going to try a salt at a ratio of about 1 tablespoon of kosher salt to the water per pound of curd. Now, I don't know for certain what the weight is here, but generally speaking, a gallon of milk is going to give you about a pound of cheese. So I'm kind of going to run with that basic understanding. Okay, so now I'm going to drain our curd. We want to get as much of the water out as possible. Now at this point it looks like a really just squishy, wet mass of mush, but it is not going to stay that way, I promise. And what I like to do is actually transfer it into a finer mesh, because we don't want to press too much of the curd through the holes in the colander. Colander is a great start, but the finer mesh on the strainer is really better. All right, because we're gonna have to kind of roll it and press it just a little bit, just squeeze as much of that way out as we can. There we go. Get these puppies draining. There we go. So it's starting to firm up a little bit, because I'm getting all that whey out of those curds. So they're coming together into one mass here. All right, so now that I have got these curds draining really well, I'm going to take our whey, and because we have like a full pot of whey, I'm gonna use that as our hot water bath. So I'm gonna heat this up on the stove to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Our whey is now heated up to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm going to actually just lower our strainer that is full of our curd right into it and leave it alone for a little bit and let it really heat up all those curds, get them nice and uniform, and then we'll start stretching. Stretching mozzarella cheese is a very hot business, so it's actually helpful to put gloves on. Now I am actually double gloving here with, I have nitrile exam gloves in my arsenal of equipment, and I have tried doing this with a single pair of gloves and it really just isn't quite enough insulation, so I'm going to try double gloving up to see if that will help keep me from burning my hands while I'm handling the hot curd. And the big thing here is not to overheat your curds. You don't want them totally melting and making a giant mess. You want them warm, but not totally melted. All right. So we're gonna move, whew, hot. Just start stretching. Now you want to stretch it to the point of not quite breaking, and then fold it back on itself. And then as it cools, it'll get more brittle. So you'll want to put it back into the hot water bath and warm it back up before you continue stretching. The mozzarella will get shiny when it is done stretching. So putting it in the hot water bath, but not very long, just enough to heat them up to, oh my goodness, hot, and then do some more stretching. And it's getting more and more elastic and less brittle, so there's less tearing. And it's also getting nice and shiny. Let's see how I can do all the way that far. This cheese is probably already done stretching. Okay, so now I'm just going to warm it up a little bit just for the sake of shaping it. only for a few seconds. Whew, hot cheese. All right, just kind of folding it over on itself and tucking it in until I have a nice, beautiful ball of shiny mozzarella cheese. I'm sorry I didn't have the camera closer during all that process, but you really can't stop. But now we have this beautiful, warm mozzarella cheese. Kind of hard to believe that 2 gallons of milk gave us only this little bit of cheese. But that's how it goes with especially goat's milk. I think it's part of it is just that the particles are finer, and so you end up with just a smaller amount than you do with cow's milk. But it's still a nice lump of cheese. And it smells good, and it'll be delicious. I hope that you guys found this how-to video useful, helpful, and maybe it inspired you to branch out, try some new things, try making some cheese. Mozzarella, you can use grocery store milk. You need to use whole cow's milk or goat's milk, honestly. It can be pasteurized, but should not be ultra pasteurized. Ultra pasteurized milk has been heated up for a longer period of time than regular pasteurized milk, and it actually destroys the milk proteins so they won't bind together and make a curd. So pasteurized is okay, ultra pasteurized is not, and you need to use whole milk because you need the fat solids to make cheese. That's all we have today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. As always, this is your urban nerd with a goat herd telling you you can grow where you're planted.